Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. So the guy we're going to cover today, I did not want to do, okay? I think he was like one of the first two people I had on my list when I first started making a list of folks I wanted to cover. But I have been pushing him further and further down on the list because when I started to read up on him, y'all, I was so sick to my stomach, okay? I have to confess, I thought I was a lot tougher than this. Turns out I'm not. I could not stomach reading up on him, and so yeah, I pushed him back. But today, I decided to cover him because I was able to move past the crumblerization. Yes, that's the word that was happening inside of me, and I got to the part where he got caught, and I was like, "Oh yeah. Oh yeah. I love this for him." And if you know the story, you'll know what I'm talking about. It was kind of like a happy ending, kind of, but not really, because I feel like it could have been better, and you'll see why later. And hopefully you agree with me. Okay, so this creature was an American serial killer and a rapist who was charged with and convicted of 13 counts of murder, 5 attempted murders, 11 sexual assaults, and 14 burglaries over a 16-month period from April 10th, 1984 through August 24, 1985 in Los Angeles and the San Francisco Bay Area. Because his break-ins slash murders usually occurred late in the afternoon and into the night, he earned the name of the Night Stalker, the Walk-In Killer, and the Valley Intruder. Who exactly are we talking about? Let's get into it. This creature's name was, and again I say was because it was yet another one that was gone too soon, too quickly, if you ask me, and he didn't get what he was supposed to get. Okay. Anyways, his name was Ricardo Leyva Munoz Ramirez, better known as Richard Ramirez. Richard was born on February 29th, 1960 in El Paso, Texas, to Mexican immigrants Mercedes Munoz and Julian Tapia Ramirez, and he was the youngest of 5 children. His father worked as a railway laborer who abused alcohol and was also very quick to angry outbursts that often resulted in physical abuse towards his wife and children. It was reported that Richard suffered a lot of abuse at the hands of his father, and Richard here was knocked unconscious. He almost died several times due to head injuries before he was even 6 years old. That's crazy. And as a result, he later on developed temporal lobe epilepsy, aggressivity, and hypersexuality. It was also said that Richard was diagnosed with schizoid personality disorder, and he was also described as a made psychopath as opposed to a born psychopath due to his head injuries. I'm so angry. I don't think that words can express my level of frustration when I read that they knew that these people were sick and they had a diagnosis, and yet they did nothing and allowed them to roam the streets freely, knowing full well that they're a menace to society. I am so annoyed. Ugh. Richard was brought up as a Catholic. However, at the age of 10, he started smoking the good old MJ and drinking alcohol. So obviously there was a lot of abuse going on at home, and Richard started escaping his home to go sleep in a cemetery. A cemetery? Of all places? That's interesting. Anyway, so he would escape his home and would spend nights sleeping in the cemetery, and it was said that his dad would tie him to a crucifix in the cemetery overnight as a punishment. What? And we don't even know how many times he did this, but that is sick. That is very different. You ain't never heard of a switch? No, you don't do that. It's child's play. Let's put him up on a crucifix and leave him there overnight. Anywho, another means of escape for Richard was his older cousin named Miguel, also known as Mike. When Richard was 12 years old, he went to stay with his cousin. Now, this cousin was an Army veteran, okay? He was a decorated Green Beret in the U.S. Army, and he himself was also a serial killer and a rapist during his service in the Vietnam War. He would brag often to Richard about the crimes that he had committed during the war, and he had keepsakes, okay? He would share photos of all the women that he had raped and unalived and dismembered or decapitated while he was over in Vietnam. And some of these photos would show like women being tied to trees or wooden posts, both before and after he sexually assaulted and killed them. What a sick person. And that's who this 12-year-old was spending time with. And whatever sickness was going on in Richard's mind at the time, it was said that later on, he stated that when his older cousin, when Mike showed him those pictures, rather than being repulsed like a normal 12-year-old little boy would be, or should have been, he was actually fascinated. Yeah, it runs in the family, I guess. So, veteran Mike here, he taught his young 12-year-old little cousin some of his military skills, including stealth and killing tactics. Why not? That's definitely the kind of skills you want to pass down from one generation to another. Yeah, Mike, great job. In 1974, when Richard was about 14 years old, he started taking LSD, and he and his favorite uncle, his sick uncle, would bond over their shared love for drugs and alcohol. During this time, Richard started to develop a love and interest in Satanism and the occult. So he then started to embellish his sexual fantasies with like graphic violence, including forced bondage, murder, mutilation, and rape. While Richard was in school, he took a job at a local hotel, and the creep would use his master key card to rob and rape the guests. It is believed that Richard even messed with two little girls in an elevator at the hotel, but nothing was ever reported, so he never was charged. But his employment came to an end, and thank goodness, because Richard one day decided he was going to try and rape a woman in the hotel, and thankfully the husband came back in time and he beat Richard's behind, okay? He beat homeboy into a pulp. Good for him. But sadly, they never did press charges because they were just on vacation, and they would have had to come back just to testify against him, so they opted out of pressing charges. However, like I said, homeboy did receive a good ass whooping, and I love this for him. Way to go, hubby. On May 14, 1975, good old Uncle Mike here, our veteran uncle, okay, he was having an argument with his wife, and he decided, I guess, the best way to settle the argument was to unalive her. So he picked up his weapon and shot her in the face right there in front of Richard, who was only 15 years old at the time. And again, the creep, Richard, later stated that he was not traumatized by what he had just witnessed, but instead he was fascinated. So you watch your uncle shoot his wife in the face. You're 15. You're not shaken in the least bit by this scene, but instead you're fascinated. Yeah, definitely not right in the head, and should not have been roaming the streets. So Mike was arrested, but he was found not guilty due to reason of insanity, and instead of prison, he was confined into a mental hospital. Now, things were already not in good standing with Richard and his dad. So after Uncle Mike went away, he decided to drop out of high school in the 9th grade and moved in with his older sister and her husband, who, get this, was a freaking peeping Tom. Who exactly did this guy have in his family that could have potentially been a good role model for him? Because what? A peeping Tom? These are your resources? It's no wonder he was so messed up. So the husband, his sister's husband, Richard, and his good old Uncle Mike would sometimes go on nocturnal excursions to look at people's windows. So yeah, the trio would go around looking through people's windows. Can you just picture it? Three creeps together just looking through your window. Ay, Dios mío. In 1982, at the age of 22, Richard permanently moved to California, which is where things really took off for him, okay? He started to partake in Coca-Cola powder, which quickly became his favorite. So he started to steal so he could buy his Coca-Cola, because he lived as a nomad between San Francisco and Los Angeles County. So he didn't have no money, no job, and probably not a good place to stay. So I just picture him as like a dirty, sticky person with terrible breath and a bad BO, just walking around nasty. His first killing happened in April 10th, 1984. And that crime was not linked to him until 2009. He murdered a 9-year-old Chinese American girl in the basement of his apartment. The girl was looking for a dollar bill with his little brother, and he lured her into his apartment by making her think that they were gonna go in there to find the dollar. And once they got in there, he beat and strangled the little girl before stabbing her to death. And then the sick bastard hung her partially nude body from a pipe by her house. That is so devastating. Can you just imagine what the family must have gone through finding her like this? It's one thing for you to take her life, but to put her body on display like that, it takes a special kind of evil to do something like that. On June 28, 1984, he murdered yet another person. He broke into a 79-year-old lady's apartment in Glassell, Park, Los Angeles, and stabbed her repeatedly in the neck, head, and chest while she was asleep in her bed. It was reported that her throat was so severely slashed that she was almost decapitated. How sick must you be? Okay, so from here on out, I'm just gonna say the dates because the year will always be 1985 moving forward, okay? So 9 months later, on March 17th, 1985, Richard attacked a 22-year-old in her home in Rosemead and shot her in the face with a .22 caliber handgun as soon as she pulled into her garage. It's like he was waiting for her, but thankfully she survived because she put her hands up in a defense mode while she was still holding her keys, and the bullet it bounced back. I can't say that word. The bullet bounced back, and so she wasn't hurt. But she was also very smart because she played dead until he left and went inside the house to look for cash and or valuables, because he would always steal from them before or after killing them. So inside the house, the young lady's roommate had heard the gunshot, and she hid behind the counter in the kitchen. And as she was poking her head out to see exactly what was going on, Richard shot her in the head, killing her instantly. And about an hour later, he went to Monterey Park, pulled a young lady out of her car, shot her twice with a .22 caliber handgun, and then he fled the scene. She was later pronounced dead on arrival at the hospital. So that's 2 dead and 1 attempted murder in just 1 day within an hour of each other. It's like he had a thirst for just killing people. Needless to say, it started to get some attention from the media, and the attacker was described as a curly-haired with bulging eyes and wide-spaced rotten teeth. Ugh, that is gross. I wish it wasn't so, but it gets worse. 1 week later, on March 27, Richard entered the home of another couple. Mind you, he had broken into that home a year earlier, so he probably knew his way around. Broke in, the couple was asleep. He shot the husband in the head, which then woke up the wife because she heard the gunshot, of course. And then Richard proceeded to beat her and bound her wrist while he went about in the house looking for valuables. During that time, the woman then managed to free herself, got a shotgun, and went to shoot him. As he was turning around, She pulled the trigger and nothing. The gun was not loaded. Oh my gosh. I can only imagine the horror and the terror that she must have felt at that particular moment, knowing exactly what was about to happen to her. Needless to say, he was so mad that she tried to shoot him. He shot her 3 times. And then he proceeded to mutilate her body. He carved an inverted cross on her chest. And then he removed her eyeballs and placed them in a jewelry box. The loser then proceeded to try and have sex with her lifeless body, but he couldn't perform. And wait for it, okay? The reason why he couldn't perform is not because she was dead with no eyeballs. No, that's not a big deal. It's nothing. He couldn't perform because he was shaken by the fact that she actually tried to shoot him. That is a different kind of messed up. And then he decided to take the jewelry box with him to keep as a souvenir of that one person who almost got him. Oh my goodness. Ugh. Anyway, so he left footprints at the scene, which they took pictures of, and they also found shell casing matching that of the previous crime scenes. And at that time, the police realized that they were actually dealing with a serial killer. On May 14, he returned to Monterey Park. Remember that earlier he had pulled that girl at the car and shot her in the head for no reason? Yeah, that place. He returned there and entered the home of yet another couple. It was the husband and his disabled wife. He went in the husband's bedroom, and while the husband was reaching for his own handgun, Richard shot him in the face and then beat him until the man was unconscious. Then he entered the wife's bedroom, bound her, and raped her. She was disabled. Not that, if you're not disabled, it makes it okay, but come on. Ugh. And then he ransacked the place to look for valuables. 2 weeks later, on May 29th, he drove a stolen car to Monrovia and stopped at the house of these 2 elderly ladies, like 2 sisters, and one of them was disabled. They were 81 and 83. He went in the house. He found a hammer in the kitchen. He bound a disabled elderly lady and beat her with the hammer. And then he found the other sister, beat her as well with the hammer, and then he used an electrical cord to shock her. Then after that, he went back and found the disabled sister that he had already beaten, raped her, and then he used lipstick to draw a satanic pentagram symbol on her thighs and on the walls of both of their bedrooms. They were found 2 days later. They were alive but in a coma, and sadly they both passed away within 1 month of each other. So sad and so sick. The next day, he drove the same stolen car to Burbank, broke into the home of a 42-year-old woman and her son. He bound the lady and her 11-year-old son with handcuffs before he ransacked the place. He then released the little boy to take him to go, show him where in the house they keep their valuables. And then he went back and raped the lady repeatedly. And he kept telling her not to look at him or he would cut her eyes out. And then he brought the little boy back out, bound them together, and fled the scene. But thank God he did not kill them. On July 2nd, he drove a stolen car to Arcadia. And that's another thing. There was not like a specific pattern as to what type of house he picked. He literally would just randomly select them, like eeny, meeny, miny, moe, you're it type of situation. So yeah, he randomly picked a house, and it happened to be that of a 75-year-old widowed grandmother. After he entered the home, he found her asleep in her bedroom. He proceeded to beat her with a lamp until she was unconscious. He then stabbed her to death, and he just continued to stab her long after she was already dead. 3 nights later, he broke into a home in Sierra Madre and found a 16-year-old sleeping. He beat her with a tire iron. He had planned to do a lot more to her, but he kept looking for a knife and couldn't find one, so he tried to strangle her with a telephone cord. But for whatever reason, he said he saw electrical sparks from the cord, and then the girl started breathing again, and he believed that Jesus had come to save the girl, so he fled. Thankfully, she survived the attack, but it required 478 stitches to close the laceration she had to her scalp from him beating her with a tire iron. It literally was a divine intervention that saved her. On July 7th, he went back to Monterey Park, burglarized the home of a 60-year-old lady. She was asleep on her living room couch. He beat her to death by stomping on her face repeatedly. Then he went to 2 other neighborhoods. It wasn't said whether or not he committed any crimes there. Then he returned back to Monterey Park, and again, just eeny, meeny, miny, mo, picked another house. It was a 63-year-old woman. He assaulted her, then stole her jewelry. He had this weird thing of asking people to swear on Satan. If they say that they didn't have any money, he would ask them to swear on Satan that they really didn't. 2 weeks later, on July 20th, Richard felt like the handgun just was not enough for him, I guess. So he went in and brought a machete. He then drove a stolen Toyota to Glendale, broke into a couple's home. It was a 66-year-old lady with her 68-year-old husband. He went into the bedroom, hacked them with the machete, and then, as if that wasn't enough, he proceeded to shoot them in the head with a .22 caliber handgun. And then he mutilated their bodies with the machete before he ransacked the place to look for money and valuables. Afterwards, he drove to Sun Valley, Los Angeles, and broke into the home of another family. He shot the sleeping 32-year-old man in the head, which instantly killed him. And then he repeatedly raped the 32-year-old wife. Then he went and grabbed their 8-year-old son, dragged him around the house to help him look for valuables, and then kept making them swear on Satan that they weren't keeping anything from him. On August 6th, Richard drove to Northridge and broke into the home of another couple, a 30-year-old man and his 27-year-old wife. The creep went into their bedroom, shot the wife in the face, and then he shot the husband in the neck. But as he was trying to leave, the husband started fighting back. He tried to shoot him 2 more times, but he missed, thank God. But he still ended up getting away, and the couple did survive the attack. 2 nights later, he drove to Diamond Bar, to the home of another couple, a 31-year-old husband, his 27-year-old wife. He instantly killed the husband by shooting him in the head. Then he handcuffed the wife and beat her while forcing her to give him the location of their valuables and money. Then he brutally raped her. And then while he was doing that, he kept asking her to swear on Satan that she would not scream while he was assaulting her. Meanwhile, the couple had a 3-year-old son that came into the bedroom, and Richard then proceeded to tie up the child and continue to grape the mom. And then after that, he left. So like I said, the news was covering him a lot at this point, and Richard was also following the news, and he must have felt like they were closing in on him. So he decided that he was going to leave Los Angeles for a little while and went to San Francisco. On August 18th, he entered the home of another couple. He shot the husband while he was sleeping, which instantly killed him. And then he beat and sexually assaulted the wife before shooting her in the head and leaving her for dead. And then he used the lipstick to draw the pentagram and the phrase "Jack the Knife" on the bedroom wall. Once again, he left a shoe print at the scene, which the detective discovered and matched to a specific pair that was not very common at the time. So the detectives then investigated and found out that there was only 6 pairs of those shoes that existed in the men's size 11 and a half, and 5 of the 6 pairs were shipped to locations in Arizona, and the 1 pair was shipped to a store in Los Angeles. So then it was fair to conclude that that 1 pair must belong to the perpetrator. And then it was also evident that the ballistic and the shoe prints from the Los Angeles crime scene matched that of the San Francisco crime scene. So that was good. However, the San Francisco mayor decided to leak that information during a press conference. The detectives were livid rightfully so, because the perpetrator is out there probably watching, and he's gonna see that press conference and he's gonna get rid of the evidence. And sure enough, that's exactly what happened. Richard was watching the news, saw what was happening, and he dumped his shoes and he laid low for a while before he made his way back to Los Angeles. On August 24th, Richard traveled 76 miles south of Los Angeles in a stolen orange Toyota to Mission Viejo, and that night he entered the home of a 45-year-old man. Poor guy had just gotten back from a family vacation in Mexico. They had a 13-year-old son who just happened to be awake at the time. And while the family was asleep, the little boy decided to go outside to try and get a pillow from inside a truck. While he was outside, he heard a rustling noise. He just thought it was some sort of an animal, and he decided to do a little bit of investigating, but didn't find anything weird, so he went back inside the house to work on his mini bike. And that's when he heard footsteps from inside the house, and thinking that it was like a prowler, the little boy went to wake up his parents after watching Richard from his bedroom window. And at that point, Richard, thank God, fled the scene. The little boy was such a brave little boy though, because he ran outside and took notice of the color and style of the car, and as well as a partial license plate number. Good for him. Way to go, little boy. And then they called the police with this information, thinking that it was just a thief trying to break into their house. After Richard was unsuccessful at that previous house, thanks to the little boy, he broke into the home of another couple, a 30-year-old gentleman and his 29-year-old fiance. He entered into the couple's bedroom where they were sleeping. He woke up the dude, and then he proceeded to shoot him in the head 3 times. And then he took the fiance into another bedroom where he introduced himself as the Night Stalker, and then proceeded to beat and rape her as he forced her to swear that she loves Satan. He then asked her for money and jewelry and made her swear on Satan that there was no more. What was this man's obsession with Satan? Oh my gosh. And then before he left, he told her to tell them that the Night Stalker was here. And after he left, the young lady went to the neighbors to get some help, and the doctors were able to remove 2 of the 3 bullets from the guy's head, and thankfully he survived. It was believed that Richard was suspected of killing 3 more people, but they couldn't link those to him due to a lack of evidence, so he was never charged. But there is a strong possibility that he was the one that did it. So that last lady, the one whose fiance had just survived, she was able to give police a very good description of Richard, and with the footprints and fingerprints that they were able to obtain from like one of the stolen cars, when they ran the prints, they went back to 25-year-old Richard Ramirez, a Texas drifter with a long behind rap sheet. Okay, so with that, on August 29, they released a mug shot of Richard, and at a press conference, they said to him, and I quote, "We know who you are now, and soon everyone else will. There will be no place you can hide." End quote. I'm guessing Richard must have missed that little tidbit of information from the news, because on August 30th, he took a bus to Arizona to go visit his brother, and for whatever reason, he ended up not meeting up with his brother, and he returned back to Los Angeles on the morning of August 31st. He got off the bus and went past, some police officers who were there like waiting for him, but I guess they missed him somehow. Then he went into the store, and then there's a group of elderly women pointing at him when he got into the store. And at that point, he noticed that his face was all over all the newspapers. And so he panicked and he fled the store. He ran across the freeway and attempted to like carjack somebody. And he was pulled out of the car, because at that point, everybody got the mugshot. They had his face. They were onto him. They knew who he was. So the angry mob got to him, and when I tell you, they beat this man, and I was so happy. I was ecstatic, okay, because it's not every day that the angry mob gets you. Like, There are some people, it is better for them to be apprehended by the angry mob than the police, because the police is nice, okay? They go by the law. They have to like read you your Miranda rights and all that good stuff. You have the right to a lawyer. No, the angry mob does not have time for this. And like, I am from a third world country, and we are the judge, the jury, the prosecutor, the defense attorney, you call it. We are it. And you want to be caught by the police and not us, okay? So I was happy to get him, and they beat him up before they called the police. And when the police finally came, they took him into custody, but they whooped his ass. His first court appearance, he showed up with a drawn pentagram on his hand, yelling, "Hail Satan." Sir, no one gives two forks. No one gives two shirts about you or Satan. Stop it. The trial had a little bit of hiccup though, and was interrupted, but on September 20th, 1989, Richard was convicted of all 43 charges, including 13 counts of murder, 5 attempted murders, 11 sexual assaults, and 14 burglaries on November 7th, 1989. He was sentenced to death in California's gas chamber, and his response after his sentence was, and I quote, "Big deal. Death always went with the territory. See you in Disneyland." End quote. What? He was so sick. So 23 years later, while he was awaiting to be executed, Richard died, of course, of complications due to cancer at Marin General Hospital in Green Bay, California, on June 7th, 2013. He was 53 years old. This is where I get upset. I am mad, okay? Like, why did we take away the gas chamber and the electric chair? I like those. I feel like lethal injection now is just too soft, if you ask me. But yeah, I was excited for him to go to the gas chamber, but of course he didn't make it. Darn it. Now, Richard here, because there's a lot of sick people out there, Richard had a lot of fans, okay? Like, he should not have had no fans, but he did. There was this one lady in particular. Her name was Doreen Leoy. I hope I said her last name right. She wrote nearly 75 letters to Richard while he was in prison, and in 1988 Richard proposed to her, and in October 31st, 1996 they were married. Yes, you heard me correctly. They were married in San Quentin State Prison. During an interview, Doreen stated, and I quote, "He's kind, he's funny, he's charming. I think he's a really great person. He is my best friend. He's my buddy." End quote. Get out more. Get out more, Doreen. Because, like, who hurt you? And Doreen here was so in love that she had stated that she was going to take her own life when Richard was executed. Oh my goodness, Doreen, girl. Who didn't love you? Who didn't love you? And it's not like he was only married to Doreen. He had other girlfriends. Between 1996, when Richard was married, he was married to Doreen. And by the time he died in 2013, he was also engaged to a 23-year-old writer. Yeah, he had a way with the ladies. And my guess is it must have been the spaced out rotten teeth. Anyways, that is the story of this monster, Richard Ramirez. And like I said before, I am upset that these people are diagnosed. We know them to be sick, and yet we allow them to roam the streets freely, knowing that we're putting other people in danger. Anyways, that is all I have for you guys today. As always, thank you so much for watching. And please don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe. And I will see you guys in my next one. But until then, I hope to see you in the comment section. Bye.